Welcome everyone. My name is Day Cooper Hagel. I'm the Director of Mental Health Wilderness First Aid, and this is the first anything official that we're doing in 2022. So that's exciting. It's also the first anything official we're doing since I'm still kind of, I am still on mat leave, but I had my son in December, which was really exciting. So we're getting back in the saddle here. And I'm really excited to announce our guest speaker, our first guest speaker of 2022. And we got a nice lineup coming up as well. We've got Jeremy Adelman, who's a clinical counselor, going to talk about trauma and somatic experiencing on March 30th. And we've also got Tara Such is going to come and talk about grief loss and using nature as a partner, or accessing nature as a partner in healing in the trauma work that she does on April 21st. And then I'm looking at guest speakers for later in the year as well. But so I'm really excited about this little series that we have lined up here. And what can I say about Joelle? I'll just say a few things about Joelle, and then we'll do a little, just introduce ourselves to Joelle, anything we want Joelle to know about us. And I'll pass it over to Joelle. But this is great. If you do have the ability to keep your bandwidth, or you do have the bandwidth to keep your video on, that's really nice. It's obviously not mandatory, and if you're having bandwidth issues, you're more than welcome to turn your video off, and feel free to mute and unmute yourselves if you have something to say. You're also welcome to use the chat function. Everyone's familiar with Zoom? Is anyone not familiar with Zoom? Okay, so I don't have to go over that kind of thing. You're familiar with that. That's great. But yeah, what can I say about Joelle? Well, as full disclosure, Joelle and Rachel and I all went to school together back in like 1996 at a private school in Surrey, which is pretty neat. So now we've all kind of grown up and taken new directions with our lives. But Joelle's taken some pretty exciting ones, and I was actually going through her bio, and she's done more than I even realized. So back in 2011, at UVic, she got her Bachelor of Science with specialties in psychology and biology and ocean sciences. And I remember that she was working at the Vancouver Aquarium for quite a while, doing little workshops and demonstrations and that sort of thing. Then she went back to school again and finished up with a Bachelor of Education at UBC in 2016 with a specialization in high school science. And then went on to do a master's in counseling psychology at Adler University in 2019. And now she has all kinds of different specialties as a clinical counselor. She's also worked as a school counselor back at the school, actually, that Rachel and Joelle and I all went to when we were younger, with some of the same teachers, actually. But her specialties now include things like cognitive behavior therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, mindfulness, something called traumatic incident reduction, which I couldn't actually explain exactly what it is. Maybe Joelle will, we'll see. And EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is another kind of evidence-based trauma therapy, which is very cool. Joelle is also the author of the Conversation Guide, which is a book that came out last year. And I think she's going to tell us a little more about it and about some of the ways of approaching and initiating difficult conversations, as well as conversations around boundaries and how they can be supportive to relationships in general. So I'm really looking forward to all of that. I'm sure I missed some things. Oh, she's also a registered clinical counselor with the BC Association of Clinical Counselors. Is that what the BCACC stands for? Yeah, okay, great. That's I have a different college, but I'm glad I got the acronym right. All right, Joelle, I think we're over to you.
Okay. Has anyone heard from Greg though?
We're trying things on the back end, and it's not going well, but we're going to keep trying.
Okay. So I'm sharing my screen here. I'm not the best at computers. There we go. Excellent. All right. So here is I'll have some visuals here, and I was thinking, we can do this pretty casually. I have a lot of different slides and things we can go into, but as far as what people are maybe interested in or have questions about, feel free to just take yourself off mute and interrupt me at any time. And I'll be sharing a little bit more about what I'll go through. But first, kind of basically the exact same stuff Day said. I've gone to school for many years and finally I'm done, hopefully. I've helped co-facilitate one group of days mental health wilderness first aid, which was really amazing. It's such a great program. I've also helped facilitate some group therapy for inflammatory bowel disease mental health. And currently I work in private practice in British Columbia, mostly specializing in trauma, anxiety, communication. And I also work at a high school as a counselor 1 day a week. So keeps me pretty busy. Similar again to what Day said before, the main modalities I use are CBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy, for people who have not heard of that, and you will be experts in that, hopefully, by the end of this session. I also use some trauma modalities such as EMDR, TIR, which I won't go into, and then other modalities like DBT, which is another behavior therapy. It's a dialectical behavior therapy. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Oops. So I thought we'd just get right into it. And anytime you see this slide or this image with the chalkboard with the kids' hands, that is your invitation to please take yourself off mute if you feel like it. If not, that's fine. But if you have an answer to one of the questions I ask, why can communication be difficult? Why do you think are maybe some of the reasons I, as a counselor, see people coming to me wanting help with this? Anyone have any idea? Or maybe difficulties you have yourself? Go for it, Day. Do you ever hear that?
I saw
so sorry, that was, is it like an open question here? So why is communication difficult? Yeah, I guess mainly finding a level of trust where you want to communicate, and especially if you want to communicate something very personal. And some people struggle with just starting a conversation in general, I guess.
Great. Yeah, those are amazing answers. So there may be a lack of trust, and that can lead to all sorts of potential predictions of what might go wrong. And then two, sometimes it's just, how do we even start a conversation? Like if we have something we feel like is maybe a difficult topic to approach, how do we even go about that? Yeah, I've seen those before. Those are definitely some common ones, some common difficulties I see. Anyone else have any ideas?
I was gonna say, I know sometimes for myself, I get the sense that if I choose to communicate, I might be risking the relationship. And so sometimes if it's something difficult to communicate about, sometimes I'll make a decision to just kind of like smooth things over and not communicate what I'm really thinking or feeling, because I'm like, well, maybe it'll go wrong if I open my mouth.
Yeah. And again, I think that maybe ties into what Seb was saying too, of like that trust. And I often talk a lot about these relationship cultures that we build, even if it's in, a two-person relationship or more, where what's the level of safety there? What's the level of confidence in being able to approach these difficult topics? What are we predicting may happen due to things that have happened in the past that we're like, oh, well, last time I did this, it went terribly and this relationship maybe almost ended, or maybe that was something that happened in a previous relationship. So yeah, that's can be a difficulty for sure. Great. Any others? Rachel, do you have, it looks like you were maybe going to press unmute, but I don't know.
I was just excited that they just tried another computer and it looks like they might be getting through. So that was in regards to that.
Amazing.
Greg and Donita coming in any minute.
Awesome. Okay. Well, yeah, thank you so much for your answers. We'll see. I had a couple answers that, yes, I think we kind of hit on most of these. Why can communication be difficult? Some, but not all of what I see are, low confidence in people's ability to kind of manage difficult conversations, past conflict. Like we were saying, maybe, hey, this didn't go so well last time, so I'm afraid it's not going to go well this time. Previous cycles, so that kind of predicting the outcome, like, hey, this is just going to happen the same as it always does. You know, we're stuck in this cycle. Why even try? Just ends up the same. The lack of skills. And I think we talked a bit about that as far as like, just how do I even start this conversation? Like what do I say? And then the emotional regulation can be a big one as well. So that's, you know, sometimes we get really emotional, and that's okay, but we need to know how to manage that in ourselves and other people. And sometimes we aren't really sure how to do that. So I'm going to go into some of these. Of course, not all of them. We don't have all day, but yeah, thank you again for your answers. So now that we've kind of thought about what can make communication difficult, how are some ways we think that we can get better at communication? And again, here's our graphic. To feel free to take yourself off mute if anyone has any ideas of how we could get better. I think Danita's talking, but you're on mute. If you press spacebar and hold it while you talk, it'll take you off mute.
Okay, choose to care about the other people, because if you care, you want to communicate.
I love that. That's great. Yeah. So reminding yourself like, oh my gosh, I care about this person. Maybe right in the moment, maybe they're annoying me or I disagree with them, but like deep down, I care for them, and reminding myself of that. That's great.
Just read that in the Bible this morning, so I, got lucky.
Anyone else have any ideas of like how could we get better at communication?
You want to be here, Greg?
That's okay. Yeah. Oh, Donetta, was that a hand?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if it's something difficult, I'll often realize that maybe I've been assuming the worst in the other person, or like kind of putting different motives or expectations, or not expectations, but assumptions on like where they're coming from. And so if I take a step back from that and I try to assume that they're operating under the best possible circumstances, then that helps me in how I approach them with the conversation. Mm-hmm. So assuming the best from the other person.
Yeah, we had someone that we really looked up to, that he called that PPI, presume positive intent. And so whenever we went into something, we were like, PPI.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. Anyone else? Any ideas?
I'm just thinking maybe practicing with easy topics. So before you start pulling out the big guns and talk about something really emotionally loaded, you can practice with basic stuff. Sometimes I read something about, like, even though it seems funny and silly, but you talk about the weather, and you think that's just kind of superficial small talk, but actually that helps to start a conversation, and then you can dive into something more serious.
That is such a great point. And I say that in the book for sure. Practice, right? Practice maybe doesn't make perfect, but it makes things a lot easier. And practicing with some low stakes, like as in low emotional stakes kind of situations, you can really get better at some of these skills. And that way, when you're in a bit more of an emotionally intense situation, and it's not like the first time you've done this since learning it. So that's, yeah, definitely practice is amazing. Great. So I think I put most of those, and I think you all got even more than I kind of just put on here. So learning skills themselves, right? I mean, first of all, sometimes that's what we need to do is yeah, do I need a few more skills, a few more tools in my toolbox? Then practicing those skills so we can get used to them and have access to them when we need them. And the self-awareness piece, and I think that ties in a lot to what both Danita and Day were saying about, and Rachel, with the presuming positive intent. Like, what am I doing here? What am I kind of projecting onto the situation? So excellent. Everyone's an expert already. Let's see what else we can learn though. So here we go. So we've got a couple concepts to learn before I'll go into some of the skills from my book. But I think, okay. I missed a slide. I'm sorry, up here. I think, oh, here we go. I'm sorry, I don't know how I missed that one. So first, before I go into some of the skills from the book, I think it's important for people to know a bit of why I wrote it. And thinking about those questions about communication, I saw a need from clients for those tangible skills. There were a lot of books that go really huge into theory of communication, you know, how terrible your life looks if you don't have boundaries, how amazing it can look if you do have boundaries. But I didn't see anyone kind of giving a step-by-step guide of how to actually do this. And so I wanted this as kind of just a resource for my clients. So I made this book into two parts. So the first part is just 10 communication skills that I feel like are important for everybody to know and learn. So I kind of go into each of those, and we'll go through those today. And then part 2 of the book is how to actually apply those skills. So I take those 10 skills and apply them to situations such as setting boundaries and saying no, or, you know, canceling plans, or even ending a relationship. So there's a lot of different ways we can then take these 10 skills and maybe add or subtract or reorder them, depending on the situation. And then, of course, depending on your own personality, personal preference, and situation that you're in as well. So that's a little bit about the book and kind of a general guideline of how I'll go into things today. Again, we'll go through the 10 skills, and then we'll see if we have some time to go into some stories about how to apply them. So let me get back to here. So before we get into those skills, we need to keep 2 things in mind while we're doing this. And the first, again, is what we were talking about, is perspectives. And the second one will be a little bit about cognitive behavior therapy. So let's first talk about perspectives. So does anyone recognize this dress meme? It's a little old now, but so we may have seen this quite a few years ago. This kind of got the internet in an uproar because I don't know what other.
I clicked on Joelle's.
Oh. I'm not sure what color other people see it as, but I see the dress as black and blue. But there are other people who see the color of this dress and this photo as gold and white. So this is a really great show of how we all have very different perspectives. And in real life, the dress is actually black and blue, but the photo of the dress, what color is the photo of the dress?
How do I get back to it?
Is it black and blue? Is it gold and white? So hopefully Greg and Danita are okay. So this can, again, be a really great kind of parallel to what happens in a lot of conflict situations that I see, where people are seeing things one way and then trying to impose their perspective onto someone else. And a lot of the time we get caught up in this, what I call defensive realities. So we're kind of arguing about what color the dress is instead of actually getting to what the issue is underneath. An example of this, and maybe a more personal kind of conflict, would be, you know, you said such and such thing, and the other person would say, no, I didn't. Or like, you hurt my feelings. Well, I didn't mean to. And so now we're arguing either like whether they said something or what their intent was, and we're not actually attending to what the real problem is, which sounds like someone's feelings were hurt. So this perspectives, or I call it even our reality. We all are living in our own reality with all our rules and our beliefs about things and how we see things. So keeping in mind that our realities, our perspectives are very different from other people's, and that we don't need to agree with them. Like, I'm never going to agree with someone that this picture is gold and white, because I don't see it like that. Even if I wanted to see it that way, I can't. So I don't have to agree with them at all. But what I do need to do is accept that they see it differently, and accept that there's people out there that see this photo as gold and white. And that's a really big piece of communication I see, is that people's egos will get in the way, and they'll say, but if I kind of show them I understand, they see the dress as gold and white, that's like agreeing with them, and I don't agree with them, so I'm not going to do that. So that subtle difference between accepting their reality versus agreeing with it can be very helpful in actually being able to show some understanding and have some connection. So that's a little bit about perspectives or realities. Any questions so far about that kind of concept? All right. So again, I want you to think about what color you see the dress and looking at the photo. And I know there are some people who kind of see it as both and who can maybe even flip back and forth, but and I see it very clearly as black and blue, especially on the far right there. But this is sometimes what I ask the kids at the high school. How would you convince someone to see the dress the same color as you? And I don't know, again, if anyone wants to take themselves off mute and say how, I always love when the kids try and do this, I'll even get one from each way of seeing it to debate in friends and be like, convince the other person to see it how you see it. And so yeah, sometimes people are just, oh, go ahead, Danita.
Sorry, I thought you could like offer to pay for their eye surgery.
That's a really good one. Yeah.
Just see it differently.
I mean, they must need eye surgery if they see it differently than you do, because
Can you flip back to the graphic for a sec, Joelle?
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe you could hold up like other pictures of things that are white and gold and show them how clearly it matches the dress. And there's nothing black or blue about the dress. Like you could help them compare it to other things to so they would agree with you.
But see, I would just be like, you're showing me gold and white things, but the dress still remains black and blue. Oops. So, oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I would maybe say something like not try to necessarily convince them that they're seeing gold and white, but convince them that they're misseeing what it is. That if they could just believe it's gold and white and that it's a trick of the eye or something, then like to maybe take the power out of their arguments that it's black and blue. Even though I don't see black and blue or gold and white.
Oh, interesting.
I'm not even sure what I see.
So these are, oh, sorry.
How do we know if a person actually does see different colors than we do? I mean, I see the sky as blue, I call that blue, but how do I know that to Donetta, that sky might look green, but she's always known that to be called blue? We don't know if people see the same thing, smell the same thing. Why some people like root beer and some people they could taste disgusting, maybe they taste differently.
That's a very good point. And I think the color thing has been proven somehow by scientists, and I forget, something to do with the wavelengths though. So I think that maybe, but yeah, and you're right. I mean, I think this all goes back to perspectives though. It's like we have different names for the same thing or the same name for different things, depending on our life experience and our reality and our perspective. And these are all things we're going to bring to literally every situation and interaction we're in. And I love these answers of how we would try and convince someone, but hopefully by just even trying to brainstorm this, we can see that it's pretty futile. Like it's impossible to change someone's mind, especially in a situation like this where it's literally what they see in front of them. So this is, again, something to keep in mind when we're communicating and possibly in an argument or a conflict with someone. Am I trying to force my perspective on them? Am I trying to impose my reality onto them? Or are they doing the same to me too? Do I feel like my reality is threatened by what they're saying is true? That's usually what I can say is at the base of almost every conflict I see when I do couples therapy, is that we are just, again, defending our own reality or imposing our reality on someone else instead of attending to the problem underneath. Great. Okay. So any other questions before we get to the next piece? All right. So this next piece is some CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. Some of you may have heard of this before, some of you may not. Either way, it's all good. I think different therapists have different ways of explaining it. So I like to use this graphic and a situation that I use in my book, which is, we're going to talk about a situation, and then we're going to talk about a reaction. And so I use the example of the situation of someone being stuck in traffic, and then their reaction is maybe that emotionally they're angry, frustrated, and maybe they're weaving in it. Their behavioral reaction is they're weaving in and out of traffic and gripping onto the steering wheel really tight. And maybe physiologically, they're feeling like really tense and hot. And so we've got this reaction, feeling angry, feeling tense, all these things. We've got this situation, being stuck in traffic. And often the way that we talk, we say, oh, well, this person's angry because they're stuck in traffic. Like the reaction is because of the situation. Basically meaning like the situation causes the reaction. Like being stuck in traffic makes people angry. It makes them tense. It makes them feel hot and yell at other people. However, if that were the case and the situation is the cause of the reaction, then anytime that situation happens, we'd get the same reaction, right? So anytime anyone's stuck in traffic, if stuck in traffic makes people angry, everyone would be angry all the time and acting that way. We know that's not the case though. There could be someone in the car next to that person with a very different reaction. So why is that the case? And there's a bit of a spoiler on the slide, which I'm now regretting, but if we think about it, there's got to be a variable that we're not accounting for if the situation isn't the cause of the reaction. And so again, spoiler alert on this, it's our thoughts. And so that's kind of one of the main concepts of CBT, is that we're not reacting to the situation, we're reacting to our thoughts. And so in the traffic example, the person might be thinking like, all these people on the road, they're trying to get ahead of me. They don't respect me. They think they're better than me. They might be thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be late to work. They might be thinking all sorts of things. And as a CBT therapist, we can do a lot with these different thoughts. But one of the main things that we like to do is, number one, become aware of them. So a lot of the time we're walking through life not consciously aware of our thoughts. Where, I don't have to, if I'm writing, I don't have to say like, touch the pen, put it to the paper. Like I'm not consciously thinking or aware of any of that stuff that's going on, which is great. Otherwise, we wouldn't get anything done if we had to actually have this kind of narrative going in our head all the time. So when it comes to situations though, where we want to get curious about our reactions, or we want to change our reactions, then we want to start becoming mindful of our thoughts. So what are the thoughts that I'm using? So again, the traffic example, like this person might be like, wow, I'm super angry. What am I thinking? What am I thinking about the situation? Oh, I'm thinking that these people on the road don't respect me. That leads me to step number 2 that we'll talk about, is challenging those thoughts. So the other big component of CBT is, just because you're having a thought, it does not mean that it's true or completely true. So thinking about that driver in traffic who's like, these people on the road think they're better than me, they don't respect me. Well, how true is that thought? I mean, do the other drivers know them personally? Probably not. I mean, are they just kind of maybe have a general lack of respect for everybody on the road? Yeah, that's maybe a bit more of a better fit. So that thought isn't completely true. I'd say it's like maybe 5 or 10% true. Like, yeah, the other drivers don't really respect me, but it's nothing personal to me. It's not a personal attack to who I am. So we want to start challenging some of these thoughts. And the reason these kind of CBT skills are important in communication is that a lot of the times we will be reacting to our automatic thoughts in situations like, this person doesn't respect me. you know, they're wasting my time. This is going to end up in a fight. Oh, there's so many different automatic thoughts that we are kind of having going on in our minds that we're not aware of and then believing are completely true. And then our reactions can be like very extreme emotions or like avoiding conversations or all sorts of like physiological symptoms. So we want to really start being aware of our thoughts. And I think some of you sound like you are already doing an amazing job at this with that kind of, you know, assuming positive intentions and like reminding yourselves how much you love and care about this person, how much they love and care about you. Because again, sometimes these automatic thoughts are just total garbage, but it's like, you know, you're not good enough, or like you're not in control, or like this person's trying to like take advantage of you, when like, is that really true? Is that really the case? Or is that just like the first knee-jerk reaction automatic thought my brain is giving me? So that's our second concept to be aware of. Any questions about that so far? Okay. So, oops, now we'll move on to, so we've got our 10 communication skills. So these again are skills. I put them in this order because they can be used in this order. However, they can also, some of them be used on their own. You can switch them around if you want. Like, you're the expert on your life and what you think will work for you. So again, this is just a guide. And so we'll go through each of these and not in too much detail. So it might be a lot of information, but if you want to learn more, you can just buy the book. Or you can just email me and I'm happy to talk about them some more. So we'll kind of rip through these and then we'll see how we're doing for time. So our first skill here is setting personal goals. So when we're going into especially a difficult conversation, but also literally any other social interaction we have, there is a goal. Like, there's always a reason we have any behavior. There's some motivation there. So using our skills of self-awareness, becoming a lot more aware of this. And this is one of the skills I mentioned to practice, is like, even if you're in Starbucks and you're talking to the barista, what's your goal in that interaction? Your goal is probably to describe your coffee order and hopefully have them make it for you, right? So thinking about our goals, bringing awareness, like, what am I hoping to achieve? And then very important is asking, are these goals even realistic? Are they fair? Are they achievable? A lot of the times we go into conversations and we think, oh, I'm going to convince them this. I'm going to get them to do this. I'm going to force them. I'm going to control their behavior. I'm going to force them to do something. You know, even if it's not maliciously, it's like, oh, this is what I want, and I'm going to try and get it. So if we are first aware of our goals and then actually check if they're realistic, fair, and achievable, this can help us not enter communications that are not able to actually be achieved. So I say all the time to my clients, like, if we could control people's behavior, I would definitely be out of a job. But we can't. So goals can't be to change someone's mind. Thinking about the dress again, like, how are we, if your goal was to go in and try and convince someone to see the dress a different color, like, you're going to be there for a long time. Someone's either just going to get exhausted and just give up. And yeah, that's probably whatever. I don't know how else that conversation could end. They would just lie and be like, sure, I see it that way, when really they don't. So again, very important to make sure that goals are realistic, fair, and achievable. And this is such a foundational skill that I come back to all the time with clients, especially couples who have said, like, I got into this argument or this conflict happened. It's like, okay, step one, what were you trying to achieve there? Was what you were trying to achieve fair to your partner? Was it a realistic goal? Was it achievable? When we're thinking about our goals, I often say they can fall under the category of to understand or to describe. So kind of like an inflow or outflow of kind of information. So sometimes we want to understand more what's going on for someone else. Like in the barista example, they're the barista's goal is to understand what you want, right? So that's why they're communicating with you at all. They need to know that information. So that's their goal. Again, in that example, describe was the other person's goal, and that can have an added intention. So sometimes it can be, I'm describing to intend to be understood by someone. Again, I can't force them to understand me, but that's my intent. Or I can describe with the intent to motivate them to do something. And so in our barista example, again, a bit of a silly example, but thinking about it as the customer, you're describing with the intention that they're going to understand you, and also the intention they're going to be motivated to actually make your order for you. You can't force them to do any of that stuff though. But if your goal is to describe with those intentions, then I think that's a very realistic, fair, and achievable thing to have going into that communication. So the last thing when it comes to setting personal goals for a conversation is to think about, how many goals do I have? Sometimes we come in and we're like, I want to talk about this and this. Oh, this situation, I need them to understand how I felt. I want to know what they were thinking about this. I also want this. That can be a lot. I see this sometimes, and this information makes a lot of sense to us. We've been thinking about it for a long time. But a lot of the time, especially when we're describing things, it's new information to our conversation partner. So sometimes we either need to split things into separate conversations, or we can take a look at our goals and say, oh, can these be unified with a common theme? So maybe, your partner, you wanted to talk to them about how they left their socks on the floor, and then they also left the toilet seat up, and they left the cap off the toothpaste tube. Well, that's a lot of stuff. So maybe it's like, oh, what's a unifying theme? It's like, I'm feeling really, really exhausted, and I'm feeling like maybe we can have some conversations about the house chores, right? And so taking a broader, more like unified theme rather than like going to each of those specifics. It's like, what emotion were you feeling in all those three situations? That's what you kind of want to get to, rather than kind of getting too specific about way too many things. So that's kind of our first skill. Any questions there? No? Okay. Well, so the next one is to choose a time, place, and platform to have a conversation. So if we're having a difficult conversation, we're like, I either need to address some boundaries or like some chores, or something's going on where I need to talk to someone about something that I'm a little concerned about how it might go. This is another skill we want to be aware of, is like, yeah, when do I do this? Where should I do this? And how? There's so many different ways for us to communicate. And I go into this more in the book about, pros and cons of each. But here are some questions just to think about to help you plan when, where, and how to have the conversation. So like, how urgent is the conversation? Like, are there safety issues here? Are there, is there like some impending event that you need to have this conversation before or after? Again, safety concerns that need to be addressed, as in, do you need to be in public where there are other people? Do you need to have like a mediator, or do you need to be not in person on a platform for other safety concerns? Are there privacy concerns? Is this a conversation not to have in public because you're talking about something really private or confidential? Thinking about conversations with that same person, what's been successful or unsuccessful in the past. So I see this happen in couples a lot. They keep having conversations after a long day at work when they're both super tired and in a bad mood, and or they're in bed, which is one of the worst places to have a conversation, because bed is for sleeping and maybe some other activities, but it is not for having difficult conversations. We don't want our bed to be, kind of mixed up in some of this like intense intellectual, like emotional conversation. So those are again, people keep doing it though. So like bringing the awareness to like, oh, we keep having conversations like right when so-and-so gets home from work, and those always turn into an argument. Like maybe I should try and wait until the weekend when we both feel better rested, or in the morning before work when we feel more refreshed. So thinking about what time it would be best for you to have this conversation, and also thinking about what the best time for the other person to have the conversation. So that might be different. Maybe someone's a morning person, maybe someone's an evening person. So that's where you want to have some compromise. And often I say, if you're the person kind of planning a conversation like this, maybe err on compromising more towards them, because you've already had the luxury of preparing for this conversation. In media, like platform or location, what's gonna kind of be best for you versus them? Is it the same? Is it different? How might you want to compromise on that? And I have some more in the book about preparing other people for conversations. And that's basically like the dreaded, we need to talk. Like when you get home, we need to talk. If we go back to our CBT skills, you can maybe think about if that's the situation, what some people's automatic thoughts might be to make sense of that situation. Is it, oh, here we go again about the chores again? Or is it like, oh my gosh, this person's going to break up with me? Or is it like, who died? Like people's automatic thoughts are going to go, and they might cause them a ton of anxiety. So again, there's a time and place to prepare people for conversations, and there can be ways to do it in a way that doesn't invoke so much anxiety. For instance, one of the examples I give in the book is giving a little bit more specificity as to like, oh, when you get home, we need to talk. I'd love to talk about the chores and how we divide like the chores up in the house. And so that way they can prepare themselves for the conversation and not be super anxious about, oh my gosh, what is this about? And again, I go into that way more in the book, but that's kind of all I'll say for now. So any questions about this one, choosing a time, place, platform? Cool.
I was just thinking about times that I've used mixed platforms, like writing someone a letter and then, giving it some time to settle in and then talking about it later or something like that. But I was also just reflecting that text has almost never turned out to be the right platform.
Yeah, I think those are all such great points, and good kind of aspects of different pieces of media, I guess, that we can use these days, which is cool. Where writing letters, I mean, the pro of that, what Day was saying, is like it gives people time to process and time to formulate the response. But you kind of lose some tone sometimes and some body language, and it's not super immediate. Whereas texting is a little bit more immediate. You still have a bit of time. There's a bit more of an expectation to respond, within a bit of a timely manner. And also sometimes tone can be an issue. We've probably all come up miscommunications with tone and text messages, right? Made a lot of sense to me when I sent it, but boy, did they interpret it a lot differently. Yeah, great. Okay, well, we'll plow right along here. So this is kind of like a bit of a cheeky, funny one, but one, again, to just remind people to do before conversations is to calm down. And I say enough. Of course, we can never be completely calm, but just thinking about what can I do to stay calm enough to have the conversation, to achieve my goals. What can I do before the conversation to help me achieve the lowest baseline? Are there things I can do during the conversation to keep myself calm? One of the ones I suggest in the book and to clients all the time is bringing some ice water. And that can be really grounding, to just touch a cold glass, to drink some cold water and feel it going down your throat, especially when kind of more like literally heated emotions come up, like anger, or even like sadness. Anything else people can do. These are all usually quite personal things, but how can they prepare emotionally, physically, and logistically? So what I mean by that, emotionally, yeah, like anything calming to, prepare their emotional state. physically, yeah, do they need to do some like grounding or even some exercise? And then logistically is like, basically what I'm teaching in the book is, am I actually prepared to achieve my goals? Do I know what I want to get out of this? And like, what am I actually going to say? What are the logistics of this situation? So yeah, that's just kind of a short one, to a little reminder one before conversations. And then, so this fourth skill is the last thing about what to do before conversations even happen, is another reminder is remember to listen. So this again can seem kind of silly, but I know I'm guilty of this. You have this like situation that's maybe really been bothering you, or this boundary you really want to set, and you're like, oh, I can't wait to like talk to this person about it. Like I've got all these things planned, and then you just go there and it's just like blah, blah, blah. And you're just like talking and talking and talking. And sometimes forgetting to listen to how what you're saying is even being interpreted by them. So this is, remember to listen, and slowing down and thinking, and I go through more techniques in the book of like how to show other people you're listening. If interrupting is a problem, like some people have a habit of, while someone else is talking, saying, yeah, 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 or just interrupting, yeah, cutting people off. Anything else, that kind of comes up as far as things that prevent effective listening skills. So, oh, do I need to shut my phone off because my phone's such a distraction for me? Yeah, how can, I once I say something, can I remember to let it land and see how it's being interpreted before I launch into my kind of next thing? All right, questions?
Can I make a comment on
Yeah.
that? I hope you don't mind me jumping in, but it's remind me of stuff that we talk about in our clinical team in doing couples work and communication work. One of the things from your last slide was these ideas of regulating and regulating throughout the conversation and regulating our own emotions. But with a couple that's, willing to work together, even if they're having some challenges, is introducing those co-regulation techniques as something that they do together. And so one of the examples we had that came up at one of our recent trainings was a couple who they had an agreement that partway through, at any time that they're having a difficult conversation, either of them could do this thing where they had some code word. I forgot what it was, but let's say it's watermelon. And, if the other one said that, then both of them together went down, and they lived by the ocean. And so they would both go and take their clothes off and jump in the ocean and get that cold water rush, which is like a regulating practice for the nervous system, right? And they would come back in, and it worked for them because they found that, together that would regulate their nervous system and also give them a chance to take a break from that conversation and do something that ended up being a bonding activity for them, even if it was a difficult conversation. So finding little practices like that. And I like that you brought up like the cold water or cold ice or ice water kind of practice, because that is a cool one. And we talk about that a bit in the course too. It's how cold is regulating for the nervous system when we're having these difficult conversations. And then I had another thought about this slide too, but I don't know if you need to move on for time.
No, go for it. Yeah, I love this. Thank you so much. I love that idea of jumping in the ocean like mid conversation, just being like, okay, let's take a time out, literally cool down, get some good endorphins going. And then, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I did it before in one of my own previous relationships where like in the middle of a very difficult conversation, we were like, we need to go fly a kite. And so like if one of us said that, we would both go out and take the kite out and actually fly it. And it always helped regulate, but it was just the idea of like doing something different, like change the script, because the script is, oh, we're getting into an argument and it's not a good argument. Let's take a break, do something totally different. And then we're going to come back and reassess. But the other thing with this slide, Joelle, the idea of remembering to listen, there's an activity, and maybe you remember the name of it. There's a communication practice or technique. I think it starts with I want to say it's IOBAN or something like that, but that's not it, but you might know. But I've done it sometimes with couples or with families. and you can make it into a game. And the game is, you can practice with something like we were saying, I think, was it Seb who was saying about the weather, like practice with something that's not emotional before you get into difficult things. But let's just practice while we're sitting here in the room together. Okay, you know, person A talks about the weather and then pauses, and then person B's job, if they want to play this game, is they don't get to respond with any of their own thoughts. They're going to sit there and they're going to repeat to the best of their ability, what did the other person say about the weather, right? And so person B tries to say what person A said, and then they ask, the other part of the game is they have to ask person A, is that right? Is that what you said? And then person A gets the opportunity to correct anything that person B missed or forgot or misunderstood. And so you do this about the weather first, and then once person B is fully to the satisfaction of person A, summarized what person A was trying to say, then person B gets to respond with their own thoughts. But you do that exercise about something trivial first, and then you can use that as a tool during more difficult conversations. Have you heard of that specific technique, or do you remember what it's called?
I don't remember what it's called, but it sounds familiar.
Yeah. Anyway, that just really reminded me of what you're saying. Sometimes remembering to listen helps to have some structure around it.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. Thank you so much. Anyone else have any questions or comments? Danita?
Oh, I have a comment, just because I'm remembering in my childhood, it was kind of a common thing a long time ago, that when children would be like upset and you're having an argument with your child or whatever, parents would often throw a glass of cold water at the child to calm them down. And I'm thinking that shouldn't that be something that a person does to themselves to calm themselves down, so they can like learn how to do the go put cold water on your face or whatever. So I'm finding it like, yeah, you can't like decide you're going to do that to a person. I mean, it's better to go fly a kite, right?
Definitely. I think doing these to ourselves, like, you know, having consent for grounding activities, if those are done in pairs, and yeah, is maybe the best way. But yeah, it sounds like it worked. Maybe just kind of shocking to the children. Cool. Any other questions, comments on this one? I know we're kind of how are we doing for time day? Should I try and wrap it up pretty soon here?
Well, we have until 2:30, and normally what we do is, you know, have some sort of invitation to do an activity or question and answer or something, you know, kind of towards the end. But if you have an idea, Joelle, for how you want to use the time until 2:30, you can run with it.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'll just go through hopefully the other 6, which are then finally getting into the conversations, and then we can just see how we're doing for time and see if there's any more kind of in-depth questions or things like that. So I will move along here. So how do we start these conversations? Now we've prepped for it. We've done, you know, thinking about our personal goals. What do we want to get out of this communication? We've chosen a time and place and platform to have a difficult conversation. We've calmed ourselves down as much as possible, remembered what we can do to stay grounded during a conversation, and we've reminded ourselves of our listening skills. So we've done a lot of pre-conversation prep. Now it's like, okay, how do we actually have a tough conversation? Again, whether it's setting boundaries or talking about the chores, which is something we always fight about, or you know, it's whatever it may be. Sharing with someone that they accidentally hurt your feelings with the joke they said yesterday. You know, how do we start these conversations? So I was curious if anyone wants to share any ways that they kind of start conversations like that, if you have a go-to technique or maybe what's worked or not worked for you in the past. Might be a bit of a tough one. So when I ask clients that, sometimes I hear a lot of people say, oh, I just like dive right in. You know, I call it ripping off the Band-Aid or coming in hot. It's just like, okay, so that thing you said yesterday really hurt my feelings, you know, because they want to just be done with this conversation as quickly as possible. Danita, I see your hand up.
I think it's important to not start out, you know, like to be a bull and go, so you did this, blah, 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 blah. So you're just like putting all the attention on that person, but rather on, hey, I feel hurt. Hey, I'm hurting, or I've got something I need to get straightened up. Put it on yourself. Then you give them the opportunity to say, hey, how can I be of help? Instead of just like putting it all on them. You did something bad. Now I feel bad. You know what I mean?
Totally. I love that. Yeah.
Putting it on yourself that you have something that you need to. Yeah. I think.
Yeah. We're going to get to that in a couple more steps. And that's
Oh,
definitely, I love that type of language of like, and we think about that as more like describing language rather than like that imposing language. And so that's awesome. Awesome. And you can definitely start a conversation just by stating that too. Again, these skills are kind of steps. They're kind of like ingredients in a recipe, and you decide based on your own taste what you like and what you don't like. So I suggest this way of starting, which I'll explain in a moment, this way of starting, conversations. But yeah, you can do it any way you want if you found that that's worked for you. Sometimes when people are really stuck though, and they're approaching a conversation that they're really worried about, I love to say, okay, start by stating common goals. So what do I mean by that? I mean, why are you in this relationship at all? What are things that you share with this other person? So I also kind of call this sometimes aligning on the same team as them at the beginning of the conversation, because that way we're not jumping in like it's me against you, like come here and defend yourself. This is like, hey, remember, like, so these could be things like, answers to these questions, like what are shared common goals? We want our kids to be the happiest and healthiest they can be. Or why am I in this relationship? We both really love and respect each other and enjoy spending time with each other. What are things we both want? We want to have a shared respected space that we both feel safe in. So keeping these goals, again, really general. They don't have to have anything to do with the specific personal goals to the conversation, but just really super broad and things that they'll agree with. And this is a bit of a sales technique where at the beginning of the conversation, you want them nodding their head and saying, yes, 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 at the beginning. Agree with me. We're on the same team here. And so when it's like, yeah, like, I really love you. You really love me. And of course, they'll probably be like nodding their head along, like, yeah, of course. Like, and this is just such a great reminder to be like, we're on the same team. We have common goals. Maybe we have different ways of achieving them, like, and that's why the conversation's happening. And phrasing these in positive language. So thinking about, oh, we don't want the kids to be unhealthy and unhappy, instead saying we want them to be healthy and happy, right? Or like, oh, well, we don't want to be arguing all the time, saying we want a really peaceful relationship. And so framing it in things of what you do want as a team rather than the things that you don't want as a team is also a great little nuance to keep in mind here. So this is, again, I find such a great way for people to start conversations when, again, they really they're like, okay, what are the first literal words that need to be coming out of my mouth? I bring them back to this, and it seems to work pretty well. Again, questions, comments on this skill or step?
I had something recommended me 2 years ago by a homeschooling mother that had gone ahead years before me. And she was saying something about, don't tell your kids what you don't want behavior wise, because they can always come up with other things you don't want that are not those things. And it's like, just say what you do want out of
yeah.
It's a lot. It narrows it down so you're actually both on the same page. And I've just found that true, with other relationships, because it's like I can say, oh, I really don't like this certain behavior or this certain pattern. And it's like, okay, well, we can solve that and do something we equally don't want that we don't even realize until down the road. So yeah, definitely the saying what you do want resonates with me.
Great. Yeah, no, that's a great example. Definitely super similar to that. Danita.
Yeah, also in my early childhood education training years ago, I learned something I thought was pretty valuable. Same idea, to tell what you want rather than what you don't want. For instance, if you give a child a tricycle outside, instead of saying, now don't ride your bike into the bushes, you just give the idea in their head for one thing. It's better to say, ride your bike around and around and around the bushes.
Mm,
And you put that image in their mind of what you want and what they're going to be doing instead of giving them ideas.
yeah,
So
great.
that's just a little thing.
Definitely. Yeah, I think again, those are exactly what we're kind of going for here. That type of language for sure. I'm gonna scoot along here for number 6. So this is probably the most important skill. So first, I want to say, what is validation? It can be like validation or empathy, or showing we understand, can kind of fall into any of those titles. But what exactly is that? And again, I go into the book so much more about like how to do this and how we can phrase this, but what might be an example of validation, just so we're kind of all on the same page and we know what we're talking about when I say that. Feel like my fellow counselor.
Well, I like in the course, that day talks about, when we talk about active listening, one of the things she talks about is like reflecting the other person's values. So sometimes just kind of validating what their values are in it, so that you're not necessarily, if you're having a disagreement about something, you're not necessarily saying that disagreement reflects on what their values are. Like you're understanding like that they value these things and that that's really important to them, and that you value their values. Did that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Yeah. Anyone else want to? Yeah, Danita.
Yeah, I just reminds me of something like validating people's things. One of the little things we have to be aware of course, is their rights to have their values validated, depending on the place and the time. For instance, if it's their home, you should validate their rules. If you're visiting at their home, you've got to evaluate their rules, but they should do the same thing back to you. You can't validate their values or principles in your territory.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, these are basically the concepts that I'm kind of touching on when I talk about this step or this skill, is like validating how they feel, especially in these difficult conversations, more getting down to those emotional pieces of empathizing with them, or just at least showing them that you understand how they feel. So again, in the book, there's a ton of different ways about like how to actually do that. And because this is such an important skill, and it can take a lot of practice. But yeah, this is one of the most important skills. I'm just going to skip ahead and say, so why is it important? Because we're kind of thinking about, we've started our conversation, we've stated some common goals. Now, can't I just go into describe like, oh, you hurt my feelings yesterday? So why is it important to first validate and show you understand their perspective, their reality? First of all, it helps them feel understood, which is great. That's great for them. It's nice that they feel good, but how is it good for me, right? I make a case for my clients all the time, like, why should you set your own ego aside and set aside describing your own reality, which we all always want to do, to first validate and show you understand their reality? So these 3 reasons are definitely something to keep in mind when, again, you just want to kind of come in hot and say like, this is how I feel. At first you say, oh, your intention was X, Y, and Z, like you were feeling really shocked by my reaction. All of those types of things, they validating them disarms their defensiveness. So if we use the dress example again, if I came in and we were like, okay, we're going to talk about what color this dress is. Yeah, I think it's black and blue. The first thing they're going to say is, well, I think it's gold and white. How about if instead I say, okay, you see the dress as gold and white. I actually see it as black and blue. Now they don't feel that urge to be defensive anymore because you've shown you understand how they see it, right? So they don't need to say that anymore. They're going to be a lot more open to actually hearing what you have to say than defending themselves. So in the kind of like insulting, I guess, or accidentally insulting someone example, by first validating their reality where their intention was not to harm you, they were really shocked that you were insulted, they love you and care about you, then you go on to the next step, which we'll get into, of like describing how you feel. They're going to be a lot more open to hearing that rather than saying like, oh, well, I didn't mean to though. Like that wasn't my intention. You've already showed you know that information. There's no reason for them to have to say that. So that's a huge reason why validation is important to the person doing it. Next, also it models the behavior you want to see. So being able to, again, put your own ego aside and wanting to describe your own reality, and first taking the time to really show that you want to you're working hard to understand them, they will then hopefully follow and work hard to understand you as well. And then third, validation helps people in that it makes sure you actually understand them. You know, it's like, oh, you didn't mean to insult me. I mean, hopefully no one would say this, but you're like, yeah, I did actually. I was really mad at you and I wanted to hurt you. You know, it's like, oh, okay, now this is a very different conversation because I understood them incorrectly. So making sure you actually understand the other person is really important for problem solving. And just, again, really helpful in so many different offshoots of conversations that are going to happen. So taking the time to first validate that person, show you understand their reality, show you understand what emotions they were feeling in whatever situation or problem that you're talking about, will help you in just all of these different ways. So it is so important and it can just help things go so much better. So I just always, again, really urge people to try and learn the skill and use it as much as they can.
Well, I have a question here, if I can chip in here. And this might be because I don't really understand validation quite yet. And so the example with the dresses, you ask, okay, and I feel like sometimes the reason why people are arguing is because validation is not possible or not wanted, I guess. So you say, okay, I see gold and white. And the other person says, well, I see blue and black. So now the other person's reality is, no, I see gold and white. This is it. This is like, I get, and then, okay, you say like, okay, I understand that you see blue and black, but truly you don't understand it because you still see gold and white. That is your reality. So would you then, I guess, lie and say like, well, yeah, I can understand that you see blue and black. It's like, wait a minute, but truly you don't understand that it's blue and black because you do see gold and white. How does that make sense what I'm asking here?
I think so. And I think that's where, you know, I kind of touched on it a little bit at the beginning, this concept that it's hard, but it's like understanding them doesn't mean you're agreeing with them. So in the dress example being like, okay, I understand that you see it as gold and white, but I see it as black and blue. So I'm not agreeing with them, but I'm open to different realities and different perspectives existing. So it's like, it wasn't my intention to offend you, but I can hear that you're offended. Like, that's valid, right? You're feeling, rather than like, no, you shouldn't feel that way and I didn't mean to. It's like, well, that's not very helpful at all. The dress example, again, falls a little short there because like, what are we trying to achieve in that conversation, right? Like, what would the goal be? Would it just be to understand each other? Well, then as long as we do some validating of like, oh, you see it as gold and white, then conversation goal achieved. Whereas in the example of someone insulting someone else is maybe a little better, where we need to like attend to the person who's hurt and maybe think of ways like, oh, we don't make jokes about those specific topics, or I'm sorry, can I give you a hug? And does that answer your question?
I guess so, and I partly understand obviously the concept behind validation, and I just kind of find a lot of discussions that I observe especially when students are in conflict, is that, well, I just truly don't understand why this person is scared of heights, or I don't understand why. So for them, the reality is so far away from what the other person is feeling that yeah, they do validate it. Most people do come around and say like, oh yes, well, I understand that you're scared of heights, but actually inside, truly, they don't get it. And closing that gap between, like, I guess empathy plays into that too, right? The ability to understand those feelings from another person. Where, how far of a lie do you communicate to validate for the sake of validating the other person?
Yeah, so again, definitely the empathy can be a skill. And I wouldn't, I guess, say it's like lying that like you understand them, because you don't have to feel, again, you don't have to agree, you don't have to feel that way, but saying like, oh, I see that you're scared. It doesn't have to be like, I feel scared and I understand why. It can just be like, I see you and I'm validating that you feel that way. And I understand that in your reality, this is scary. It's not saying, I think this is something that we need to be afraid of, or that I'm scared. So again, it's kind of that accepting of their reality. It's not lying to them and agreeing with them like, yeah, it's scary. It's like, oh, you're feeling really scared right now. Like, I see you. Does that kind of help?
Yeah,
with
totally.
the difference? Okay, great. Yeah, awesome question. Because again, that's such a kind of nitpicky concept, but a very, very important one when it comes to these things. And you can see, it can, that exact thing of people not wanting to feel like they're agreeing with someone is a reason they don't do this. And so again, if we can kind of think about the difference of like, you're not agreeing with them, you're just accepting them, then we can open up our validation skills hopefully a lot more. So great. Any other questions or comments on this one?
I just popped something in the chat
Sure.
that maybe can be an example if folks want to read through it, but I won't take up the time. I just want to note that we're getting close to 2:30, and I want to respect that people, we're probably expecting to be here until 2:30. So maybe at 2:30, we'll have like kind of a formal wrap. And then after that point, if anyone does want to stay and chat a little bit more casually, then we're more than happy to do that. But Joelle, I'll let you decide how to spend, the last kind of formal time we have.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we'll maybe just go on to the last couple. I think I'll just like really rip through them. Again, I wish I could talk more about so many of these things and how to apply them to boundaries specifically, but I guess you'll all have to just buy the book. And then of course, please feel free to be in contact with me. So I talk in the book about like how to validate people. Again, such a skill to be learned, definitely. So there's a lot of different ways to think about that, picking out different emotion words, nonverbal cues, all sorts of things, putting yourself in their shoes, lots of different stuff we can try. Then another skill, of course, is describing. So Danita already did such a great job explaining this as like, yeah, how can we show how we're feeling? And so in this, again, there's a lot of things we can do with language by not imposing like, hey, you insulted me. Instead, it would be, because they might say, no, I didn't, right? Because in their reality, they didn't insult you, but in your reality, they did. So when it comes to describing, I always say cut down to the emotions, because that's going to be the only thing that's true across realities. Someone can argue they don't think you should be feeling a certain way, but they can't actually argue that you do feel that way. That's just a fact. So again, instead of getting caught up on what color the dress is and that defensive reality is like, you insulted me, no, I didn't insult you. Well, like, who cares if they insulted you or not? You're both right. They both did and didn't insult you. The real thing here is like, I felt really hurt, when that comment was made the other day. That's something that's a lot harder to argue, basically impossible to argue with. They could say like, I didn't mean to, or like, oh, you shouldn't feel that way, but I do, So this is where we want to, again, really get down to the emotions. try and be concise, all sorts of other things that we can do to describe how we're feeling. And then, so after we've done that, sometimes there's goals and conversations where we need to, if this is part of your personal goal, do we need to change something? Like, hey, you know, I just, maybe in the future, would it be okay with you to just not make comments about, I don't know, my weight in front of other people? Like maybe that was what was insulting. So finding solutions is so important to have understood and validated each person. And then we know where the edges kind of are. And then we can find where the compromise place is in the middle. We can, during this time, restate common goals. Like we want the kids to be happy and healthy. We want to have a peaceful relationship. Like, you know, keeping those common goals in mind when we're working to compromise, and maybe not everyone's getting exactly what they want, but it's like, oh yeah, we're part of this bigger team that has this like bigger overarching common goal. And then, so we got 2 more steps. How do we wrap up conversations is a huge question I get too, right? It's like, okay, so now we've had this conversation, we've talked it out, we've understood each other, come up with some solutions. It's like, now what do we do? So again, I love to end things positively. So think about something, a behavior that they did well, and then use verbal praise. Say, I really, really appreciated the way you listened to me, and I could tell you were really working on not interrupting, and you didn't. And that made me feel so heard. And I really thank you for that. You know, or like, oh man, this was so great that I think we both did an amazing job talking about our boundaries today. Like, you know, go team. So just kind of leaving it at a positive note can kind of like wrap things up. And then if you praise behavior, you're rewarding it. And if you reward behavior, you'll reinforce it and you'll see it again. So that's one to definitely keep in mind. I've got some great feedback on that as ways to end conversations. This is also a great standalone skill, and usually the first piece of homework I give to my couples, because they're usually pretty good at pointing out what they don't like behavior-wise, because we want to change that, and that's fine in moderation. But oftentimes we forget to point out the stuff we do like, because we're like, well, it doesn't need to be changed. They should just know I like it. But it's always great to get that praise. And then lastly, after an intense conversation, practice some self-care. You know, there's all sorts of self-care. Is there anything I need to do logistically now? Do I need to like change some plans or, you know, do something? Is there anything I need to do physically? Grounding, take a shower, go for a run, do some yoga. Do I need to do something emotionally? You know, maybe do some journaling, talk it out with a friend. Anything spiritually? Do I need to pray, dance? And what can I give myself credit for that I did well? So this is kind of like that verbal praise, but for yourself, of like, you know what, maybe the conversation didn't go perfectly, or like, oh, it was really hard, I was so nervous, but oh my gosh, I did it. I remember to drink my ice water when things got heated. Or, oh yeah, I did it. I did that positive reinforcement thing Joelle was talking about. I did that really well. So giving yourself some praise as well. So I know I really ripped through those. I hope that was helpful and kind of scratched the surface on some of these skills. Again, if you want to pick up a copy of the book, it'll go into them obviously in a lot more detail and how to apply them to really specific situations like saying no, setting boundaries. So yeah, and again, I'm happy for people to reach out to me with any questions they have about any of the stuff in the book. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And I guess we'll just open it up. We've got about 2 minutes for any last questions or comments.
I'm more than happy to like I'll be staying, you know, at least another 15 minutes or whatever after we do a wrap. And people are more than welcome to stay and hang out. I just want to give people the opportunity that if they plan to, they need to go somewhere at 2:30, that we can do that. But I saw a hand, so I'll mute myself.
Oh, I think that was Danita, right? Yeah, go ahead, Danita. Oh, you're muted.
Unmute. Is it Seb? Is that how you pronounce your name, Seb? Seb?
Yeah, he said, yeah, thumbs up.
Yeah, thumbs up. Okay. Yes, Seb, I'm not 100% sure I was really knowing what you're saying, but I think you were going by it's hard to validate something that you disagree with or that you can't imagine yourself having those feelings or thoughts about that same situation. I think that's what you were getting at. I was just thinking maybe at that time, that's the time to say, I'm not feeling it or understanding why you would feel fear in this situation or anger or whatever. Will you tell me more? So you need more information from that person to find out like why they feel the fear or the anger or whatever. It obviously probably has something to do with their past experiences or something. And then they have an opportunity to explain those things to you. They might even be able to help them with, if you can help validate that you probably would feel the same way if you had been in that same situation, had those same experiences, but you haven't. So you just want to know more about how they came to that conclusion of feelings or whatever. It's just a thing about like, tell me more about yourself.
Yeah, that's a great technique, I think, if we're feeling confused. And I think it's like, you know, validating like, oh, you feel, I think Seb's example is like, oh, that's really scary for you. Can you tell me a little bit about what's scary about this situation? And then just again, being super open to it. This isn't an opportunity to argue against their reasons, though. We got to be really careful about that, giving them the space, like all the reasons are valid. Like I think Seb, you mentioned a ropes course. It's like, oh, what if I fall? And so, you know, again, using the powers of validation of like, oh, that could be a really scary thought if you're thinking about falling, rather than being like, well, you can't fall, you're in a harness. You know, so we still want to always, when we're probing, to use our validation first and be like, oh my gosh, yeah, thinking about falling would be so scary. What do you think we have here that helps us make sure we're not going to fall, though? You know, or and just kind of again being very gentle and being very validating that like in their mind, that's a very real probability. That is very scary. And so like being respectful of that, but still also bringing in, I think, some like a little bit of challenging of those thoughts and helping them do that rather than kind of just doing that for them. But yeah, I think that's again, Danita, a great technique. If you want to learn more, that's validation, right? That's asking questions to understand their reality, not only how they feel, but maybe why they feel that way.
I think that's something that unfortunately we don't learn, or we don't, but at least my generation wasn't raised that way, right? So talking today, now you have a kid, you find that sometimes too with our kids, we're like, you know, they fall over and you're like, oh, that didn't hurt, stop crying. But saying like, oh, that must have hurt, and understanding and showing them the validation on the truth of their reality is so important for raising strong kids, I guess. And unfortunately, like our natural behavior is something completely different. Like, well, how I was raised, at least, like, oh yeah, that can't hurt. Come on, be tough, right? Those comments that we all know. I got at least from from parents and older people that raised you, and so being aware of that, and we can practice this pretty much not just in a discussion or not just in a conflict, but pretty much throughout the day. Just telling people like, oh yeah, I can see that, and giving that affirmation to people.
I remember one of the things, because I did a clinical internship in child and youth mental health down in Victoria, and this was after I'd worked with you guys, Seb. And one of the things that struck me is the child psychologist I was working with, and she was brilliant. Like I just loved her. Her specialty was kind of 3 to 5 year olds, and so it was really interesting just watching her work, because the ways that she would language complex information for young people is she would put it in really simple terms and she would just repeat it over and over again. And I remember learning so much from her myself as an adult, just listening to how she would language things for children and use the repetition. And one of the things that she would language a lot is she would notice, there's 2 kids doing an activity and one kid wants to do it this way and another kid doesn't, or one kid feels scared of it and another kid doesn't, and they don't understand each other, like maybe the ropes course or something like that. And she would just come in and she wouldn't try to solve this problem for them directly, but she would just language exactly what was happening for the kids. And she would say, oh, you have a scared feeling about this and you don't have a scared feeling, and sometimes we have different feelings about things. And that was what she would repeat, is sometimes we have different feelings about things, don't we? And she would just say it really gently like that, and just language for the children that sometimes we have different feelings about things. And I find myself saying that, not in quite the same tonal language, but in similar words, to adults. Sometimes it's like, yeah, I experience this and you experience it this way. And sometimes we have different feelings about things, and that can be okay. Thanks for helping me understand yours, or whatever it is. But yeah, that helped me working with her.
Great. I'm just catching up on this stuff in the chat, because since I was sharing my screen, I wasn't able to. So I don't know if there were any questions in there that were left unanswered.
Oh yeah, I wrote a lot of stuff in the chat.
Just that I've been called crazy for seeing the dresses black and blue. Is that your professional opinion?
That's my professional opinion. Maybe we can chat just a little bit about the reinforcement skill too, Joelle, because I really like that. The idea of verbally reinforcing positive behavior just as much as negative behavior. And it reminded me of a couple of weeks ago, Rachel's got 5 kids, and they all came over here. And that's one of the things that I try to do, is pick out behavior that I like. And I remember I lent all my markers to her 5-year-old, and he was coloring on the floor, and then he walked away and did something else. And I was like, oh, he put back on all of the caps. Because I looked over and been like, oh, I bet he didn't put the caps back on the markers, and they're going to dry out. And I looked over and he had put all the caps back on. And so I was like, oh, Huck, you put all the caps back on the markers. Thank you for doing that. And I just really wanted to verbalize that. I think that's really important, not only for reinforcing behavior, but also for building relationship with the people that we're with. And so that's always something I tried to do when I worked up at Strathcona Park Lodge too, right? Is calling kids out for good behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that woman that I was actually talking about that said the thing about saying what you do want. One of the things she always said was, like, when dealing with your kids and communicating with your kids, that for every one time you're critiquing something, there should be 9 times that you have called out a positive behavior. And also a thing that she was really, really big into, that she advised me of, was that when we say these compliments to the kids, and we're saying something, really complimentary, that we look into their eyes, because so often as parents, we want to make sure that our kids are making eye contact with us before we critique something that they've done. So eye contact is associated with oh, you're in trouble. You've got to look me in the eye so that you can get scolded for something. And so I mean, now my kids roll my eyes at me, because I'll be like, come here, look me in the eyes. And I'll be like, I love you. You're beautiful. And, but that's something that I really tried to remember. And then my real life example of this, of being really positive, is when I first started dating my husband. This was almost 20 years ago. His grandmother always made meat and potatoes for Sunday dinner. And I don't eat meat, and I also don't really eat potatoes because they inflame me anyway. So this was very, very blew her mind, challenging. She's of a generation where she had to make meat, right? And so she found me, especially back then, there weren't a lot of options, these very weird fake meat burger things that she would microwave and put on my plate as if it were a piece of meat. And it was absolutely disgusting. Okay. It was the sweetest thing. It only came from love. She was really, but it was so gross. And then this one time they were out of it. And so she bought me this little frozen vegetarian lasagna that they had, and it was so good. And I remember, because I never could bring myself to say anything about not liking this other thing that I would have to force myself to eat. And so I remember I was like, I'm just gonna lose it over how great this lasagna is. And then every time she randomly got this lasagna, I would just lose my mind over how good it is. And then eventually she just only got the lasagna for me.
That's a great example. Exactly, right? It's people will change their behaviors based on how we react to them. So cool. Anyone else? Questions, comments, stories? I like the stories.
I was thinking about what Seb had said about, if you're, I don't know how old Felix is now. He must be 5 or something. Hey, he's getting big. Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, I was just thinking about what you were saying. I don't even know if I have a thought about this. But you were just saying something like if he falls down and he hurts himself, and there's different ways that we as adults like react to that, which is maybe similar to how we as adults might react if a kid is scared of high ropes or something like that, and we there's no real like reason logically that they should be scared. You're in a harness, you're roped up, or I can see that you fell down, you didn't really hurt yourself, like you're just kind of shaken up, like kind of walk it off. I don't exactly know where I'm going with this, but it's something like, acknowledging that two things can be true at the same time. Like, hey, you can even, and maybe sometimes I use the even though language, like just to acknowledge to them what's going on. Like, hey, even though you're roped up and you're totally physically safe, you still feel scared. And two things can be true at the same time, right? Even though, hey, I can see you fell down, and look, you're not hurt. You didn't even skin your knees. Your knees are totally safe. And it was still scary, and that's okay that you're crying. Like two things can be true at the same time is a bit what you were reminding me of, Seb, when you were saying that.
Yeah, that reminds me of like dialectics, and dialectical
Right.
behavior therapy is just like
Right.
that's so much of some of the key tenets of that theory, is just how can we walk that middle path and live in a world where both of those things that are seemingly opposed are actually true at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whereas I guess based on what Seb was saying about, the messages you got when you were growing up, Seb, it was just like the focus was on one and not the other. Like you're fine, get through this, or don't cry, or whatever the message is. And I also think, to be fair, I also think sometimes that we can err too much on the side of only, sitting with the feeling so much that we can actually make it bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And not also reinforcing like, and you're safe, you're okay, and you can be in control of this feeling, and you can take a deep breath while you're crying, and again, two things can be true at the same time, and we don't have to swing all the way with them into their emotions, nor do we have to swing all the way away and get them away from their emotions, like you're saying, Joelle. Like we can walk the middle path.
Yeah, that's something, when being a counselor and, volunteering at the crisis lines and things, people often don't validate for that reason because they're afraid they're going to amplify that emotion, right? It's like, oh, you're feeling really like hopeless right now. It's like, oh my gosh, is that going to just make them feel so much worse? And like, oh my gosh. But no, it's like people just want to feel understood. And it will probably amplify their emotion more if someone minimizes it, like, oh, well, it's not that bad, like there's hope. It's like they'd be like, no, but I'm so like then they'll actually start. So it seems kind of like, I don't know, counterintuitive to be able to like kind of show you understand will actually help some emotions, like ease up, like Dave was saying.
Do we want to say any last words? Maybe this is a good place to think about wrapping things up.
I would just like to say thanks everyone for coming. Unless anyone else has anything else to say, my book's available on Amazon if you want to buy a copy. If you do.
I do want a copy for my bookshelf.
Oh, great. Yeah. And I just hope everybody learns something. I wish I could have just taught you everything from the book, but we just don't have enough time. So I hope there are skills that you're able to think about and apply to your life, even starting today. So yeah, thanks everybody.
We bought your book. I'm going to get into it real quick. Greg bought it.
Yeah, thanks to all of you for putting this together. I really appreciate your time. This is awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, well, thanks, Joelle. Really appreciate your time today. And I know you put a lot of effort not only into the book, but also into putting together what you were going to talk about today. And really appreciate that.
My pleasure.
I will be editing the audio and video, and I'll put it up in some capacity on the blog and on our YouTube, and put it out on our social media and that sort of thing too. I'm thinking of making this into a podcast series, which is another big project, but maybe that's a good way to spend some of my mat leave.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you again for having me. This was great. I look forward to seeing who the other guest speakers are.
Yeah. Yeah, we got some
Same.
good ones coming up. Yeah, keep in touch.